Can you hear me? Yeah? Everybody awake? Good afternoon. My name is Yuval. I work for Google. I lead the strategy of the Global Operations Group. Think of this group as in the crossroads between product, engineering, marketing, and our sales function. What I'm going to talk a little bit about today is my experiences, not just in Google, but even before that, in Microsoft, Skype, and other companies, about what sort of ingredients and what sort of balance do you need between those ingredients and concepts in order to create a culture of innovation. If you think of it, this is just a document that's continuing to be written as I gain more experience and I get more insights through working in different organizations and assuming and implementing those lessons learned. I'm going to start off with quite a long introduction, talking a little bit about those concepts and how I think of them. But I will start with some sort of disclaimer. Now, it is true that if you apply a certain sort of mindset and approach and model, you could solve different problems in different industries, in different areas, in different situations. However, none of the situations are exactly identical, meaning that you need to be very agile and very flexible in your mind to understand and to notice and to recognize those differences. They could be very subtle between different situations, not just across companies, but even within company and within different situations. A quick example could be you could have the same sort of project, the same sort of approach, the same sort of objective, but a different stakeholder. And that stakeholder is key. And that stakeholder has a certain personality and a certain character and a certain way of getting to them. If you apply the same sort of approach that worked for you before, without noticing that subtle difference, you may fail. So it's important as a leader, as a manager, to have that flexible mindset whenever you deal with things. So right, it's the same, but it's always also different. So that's basically what I talked about, is having that balance between what worked for you before, which is important. We need to build on our experience and our lessons learned, but we can't let them narrow our vision when we approach new problems. And we need to understand what those differences are. Keeping agile is key. So strategy. Strategy is an important element, important concept in any business. And if you think of strategy, a lot of people illustrate that as a game of chess. You move from A to B, keeping in mind that the market moves, there's dynamic, there's flexibility. You need to have data and metrics in place in order to measure that. However, we all know that sometimes a lot of great strategy plans don't survive the test of execution. I know the motive of execution was mentioned before as well. Now, what can you do in order to prevent your plan, as good as it is, to become just, a file in one of those cabinets? A lot of efforts, a lot of time spent on it, but nothing gets done. Again, we come back to the other motive, which is balance. You need to balance between the execution and the planning. So right, you need to focus on the future. When you deal with strategy, we deal with uncertainty. Nobody knows what's going to be in the future, so any sort of strategy is a bet. You can increase that bet, you could have predictive analytics, but again, it's just a bet. You need to balance that with execution. Know your organization, know your people, know the capabilities. Can they actually execute on that strategy? But again, too much focus on the execution and you're not going to think big enough to move your company in the market. Too much focus on the planning, you're going to have more cabinets with the strategy plans. So that sort of balance is required in strategy as well. Big data, another big term. Everybody talks about it, and for good reasons. In Skype, we did a complete digital transformation that started off with data. The big story that we had over there is that initially we focused just on technology. Technology is not nearly enough. You need to address the change management element that is required with any sort of big data transformation. Because eventually, what do people do with all that data is a key element. The leaders, the managers, the whole organization needs to rally around the big data and actually use it and adopt it. If you have no adoption, real adoption, people changing the way they work, then what have you done? And that's, again, focus on the balance between just technology and the change management and the cultural aspects that are required to change the way people work. I always mention that big data, because it's such a big revolution, requires organizations to change their regular legacy processes, the regular approach, the leadership style. And if they're not willing to do that, they'll also only have partial success with big data. Collaboration is another important concept, and indeed, sharing the information and being able to work well together is key. But over here, again, you need to have that balance, because sometimes when you're being, in a way, too transparent, looking for consensus with everyone, you're not going to be able to move ahead. And just recently, we had an initiative and an issue, not a big issue with the customer, but a small issue, but that wasn't resolved. And the issue that wasn't resolved is because you had about 20 stakeholders in place, representing 10 different functions, agendas, and so on. You couldn't move ahead. So sometimes you need to narrow down the focus, solve the problem, put the solution in place, and then you open it up again to the rest of the stakeholders. I think that's also a key element in innovation as well. And then we come back to innovation. Innovation, everybody thinks, rightfully so, it starts with an idea. But it is more than that. Idea sometimes is just 5% of the problem. How you execute on that idea, how you actually create a product, services that's being executed and performed in the market is a whole different story. And another story is how you make that not just a one-time thing, but a continuous approach. An organization that actually innovates, that has that innovation mindset, is again a different thing. And over here again, you need to balance it. But I guess the difference between this balance and the balance with the strategy is that in this case, you need to have more leeway in terms of thinking big. You can't focus on too much. But again, you need to know what reality is, because just like we don't want strategy plans in cabinets, we don't want innovation just to go to waste. And that's just to kind of summarize the point, which is all these business concepts used to be dealt with in isolation. You dealt with strategy, you dealt with innovation. Everything is interconnected, interlinked. It may be part of the big data issue, but everything is connected, and you need to look at things end-to-end, corporate-wide. So in terms of the content, the first point which we've basically made is that you can't go it alone. Innovation, strategy, any of those elements need to be addressed, and with the independency that they have with one another. Second point is, like everything in life, you need the right balance and the right harmony in the organization, the right culture to actually move ahead. And I'm going to give a few examples of things that I found in previous employees that actually work. A little bit about Google. I'm sure Google doesn't need any introduction, but this is just one letter from our IPO. Google doesn't try to be a conventional company, but it doesn't mean that we don't take best practices or elements from big corporations. We are a huge corporation right now, more than 50,000 employees. There are good things that you can take from it. There are good and bad things that you can take from startups, and we're trying to get the best of both worlds. Another point that we have in Google, and actually even before that, is the focus on the user, and all else will follow. When we mean all else, is all the commercial and economical beneficial that you can get out of launching successful products. And one thing that I always use, and I use right now in my work and previous work with the different teams, is I ask the question, for any sort of initiative, for any sort of action, at any level of the employee across the organization, how does your action benefit the user? And if you can't answer that question, or if that answer is a bit hazy, then you need to think it over. Always think about the user is not just a concept, it's actually a reality. And we try to ingrain that and instill that in every employee every day. It sounds intuitive, it really isn't. So again, as we said, innovation requires that sort of framework, that sort of atmosphere and culture to actually succeed. It's not just that you need that transparency, it's not just you had the simplicity. It's not just that you need that strong sponsorship from leadership. You need a lot of those elements together, and again, at the right balance. And that balance can be different for companies. It can be different in different times of the company, different pressures across the market, and so on and so forth. The same that goes for innovation goes for strategy, big data, and a lot of those other concepts that we hear in business today. All of them need that element of culture. And that's why you see a lot of organizations actually putting a lot of focus on culture. One famous document is Netflix's, how Netflix reinvented HR. I don't know if any of you read it, but it's what Sheryl Sandberg, the CEO of Facebook, said is the most important document that ever left Silicon Valley. I highly recommend it. It's a great new approach to motivating employees and getting more engagement in the workplace. And again, you can't go it alone. So how do you actually do that? What I use sometimes to illustrate the challenge of actually finding the right balance of the organization is, you need to create a puzzle of the different pieces. Each piece represents a different concept. It could be from politics in this organization with the specific personalities and human elements that you have, the technology, the market, and so on. But you can't just go into a side room and create that puzzle because everything moves fast. Especially in the technology world, it's a fast-paced environment. And I think one of the gentlemen before has said that the biggest risk is actually not doing nothing. It's very true over here. You do nothing, you go behind. So you need to create that puzzle in order to find the right sort of tone for your company. And the way you do that is balance. And what I've found is very useful or create that balance is basically culture. Let's face it, still organizations are human phenomena built by people for people. The people could be the greatest inspiration for the company. They could be the enablers for any sort of innovation or any sort of product. However, in the wrong sort of environment, they could be the biggest restraints as well. They could actually stop innovation from happening. In a closed-minded, hierarchical environment, it kills any sort of new ideas, and those people that have that energy and motivation in them would move elsewhere. So the culture and how you work with people is very important for innovation and for any success or growth in the business. So what is culture? To me, culture is what are the behavioral norms that are acceptable and predominantly present in organization. And culture is not just a unified thing that you find across all the organization. There are subcultures within the organization. There are teams and groups that work better than others, and there are some that less so. But basically, it's the ABC of how your organization really works. And again, why are we talking about culture? As I mentioned with Netflix before and other companies understand that, innovation, yes, we all agree it's a growth engine. We need innovation to get ahead. But how do we create innovation? So one of the elements, because it's all based on talent and on people, is create that environment that lets people have the freedom to innovate, to think differently, and to create value for the company and obviously for the users. This is just one comment from our executive chairman. So again, we talk about culture. It's the DNA of how your organization works, and there needs to be a lot of focus on that. And again, it's not just those soft elements. It's actually everything you do in the organizations. The issue with culture is that it sounds very, intangible, but you sense it, you feel it every day in the company. You go to a different company, you sense that as well. It's something as simple as, do people come to meetings on time? Is there really a good attitude towards risk, and so on? This is taken from the HubSpot Culture Code. Because we're dealing with people, we need to also understand how the world has changed and what has changed with the desires of the employees. So in the past, maybe most of the motivation, not all of it, was looking into pensions, the paycheck, the good 9-to-5 job, working in the office and, staying in the same company, sometimes the entire career. Nowadays, it's a bit different. People want impact. People want purpose in the work, because work and life has become almost synonymous. You can't completely separate your personal life from your work, so there needs to be an impact. Obviously, a paycheck as well. In terms of where and when, it's whenever, wherever, whatever. Because we're connected 24/7, you could do your best work at the midnight, or you could do your best work on 9-to-5. It doesn't matter. As long as you have the leadership that supports it, that views things on metrics and did you perform, that's all important. And the key component is the attitude of the organization to failure. And again, we don't want just a lip service saying that, yeah, you need to fail fast and trial and error. How is failure actually regarded in the organization? And again, on the other hand, you can't just fail. You need to learn the lessons from it. You know who this quote is from? It's not from Steve Jobs. It's not from Larry Page. It's actually from LeBron James. Everybody know LeBron James? There you go, NBA, basketball. Basically, what I'm saying is that businesses don't have, control of those issues. Those issues of human, of culture, appear also in sports, and there's a lot that businesses can learn from sports, not on just culture, not just on innovation, but on teamwork and so on and so forth. So basically, the way I view culture is the tension between all those business concepts and where does your organization stand in those concepts. Again, it's not unified across the organizations. We have subcultures as well, and it changes all the time. It's very dynamic. In some cases, you need to be very much focused on execution. In different times, you need to be focused more on the strategy, on the long-term plan. It changes all the time. The world is dynamic. We need leaders and managers who are agile, who are flexible in their mind, who are open to change at a moment's notice. So a few things that I found to get it to work. One thing, and that's specifically taken from the Skype experience, is metrics. Data-driven, but really data-driven. Metrics are important because they're a good way to align your organization and set a constant language across different functions. So if you think about marketing, they want to do campaigns, product, they want new features, and engineering want smoother operations. They all wanted the same thing, but they communicated in different languages. Metrics, shared metrics across the org, is what provides that sort of common understanding and view of where should we be heading. And a few approaches to that is that you have the metrics on the top which are important to the senior executives, and if you're a public company, to the market, and you have the metrics that are important to the different teams. What you do is create some sort of framework that helps connect the dots between the two. It's very important because just a few elements. When you deal with a company that has more than 300 million users, sometimes over 1 billion, you can't communicate to each and every client individually. One of the best forms of communication is through metrics. If the customers are happy, the dial on the metric would go up. If they're not, it would go down. So a focus on those metrics can help also get you closer to the user and have that concept of what's good actually for the user. How does the user benefit? And it's also one of the best ways, almost the only way, for experimentation. How do we know if we're doing a good job? Trial and error, see how the metric changes, and then you take it away. Anything else? No, it just basically focuses the organizations on value. Because if those metrics represent value to the user, and if we focus on those metrics, we focus on value. A good way to align the organization. The other element is transparency. And that means connecting the data element to the business and to the strategy. And making sure that the effort, the activities that we have are actually linked to a metric. And that's very true in Skype, Microsoft, and also very much in Google. What is the measurements of success? How do we define success? And are we sure that the definition and the measurement is correct? And that's why we're very much data-driven, because if there are different opinions, subjectively, the data actually tells us where to go. But we also need to be very careful with data. I know a lot of people talk about being data-driven, but there are some areas that you can be driven by data, which means the exact opposite. So the narrative of the different manager can massage the data to look a certain way. That's why there needs to be a very good focus on the definition of the metric, how is it being measured, and then how it's being implemented as well. And lastly is the business rhythm. So I said before, in order to get the organization to change or to adopt either more innovative culture, a more data-driven culture, the legacy elements need to change. And the basic element of looking at the data, gathering the insights, taking the action, reviewing again and again, needs to be done across all parts of the organization, from the low-level employees or for any sort of employee all the way to the executives. And that helps also with the communication between everything. And it's a great platform to collaborate, having the product managers in the middle with the product that deals with the customer, and having all those stakeholders in one place, so it's very clear about the communication and what's going on with the product. And another important thing is that whatever we do, if we deal with data, if we deal with innovation, it needs to be elementary to the employee's organization, like brushing their teeth. And that takes time. But there needs to be perseverance with the management, with the leadership, in order to make sure that whatever change we put in place, just like any strategy plan, it doesn't stay in the cabinet, it actually gets implemented. The execution is the important part. The strategy, in many cases, is the easy part. So, and this is again from the Skype experience when we did a huge digital transformation. Initially, the focus was just on the data element, and then we moved into the tools for a self-service model and the governance, how we work across those tools. But in order to eventually create an innovative organization or a user-focused organization, culture is essential for all of those elements. And sometimes culture makes or breaks those initiatives because it's the humans that eventually are either the enablers or the restraints for any sort of initiative or value that's again going to be in the organization. And lastly, is, as I said before, these sort of elements, once we've built the puzzle together, needed to become from a corporate way to a team way. I mean, the basic unit of the organization, as far as I'm concerned, is a team. It's not the individual, and that sort of mindset needs to be instilled in all those teams. And the benefits, obviously you get more alignment across the organization. People know what the purpose, they have meaning in the work, they have impact, they're not afraid to fail. The culture and decision making is more data driven. Again, not just data driven, but more data driven. And eventually, I mean, it's when those changes of innovation become actually second nature to the employees, become the business as usual, that's when you know you actually succeeded in transforming. But you still need to nurture that sort of culture, those sort of activities in order to maintain it, because it's very easy to go back to the old habits if you don't nurture and maintain that approach. And obviously you get business benefits of it, because if you don't get any business benefits of it in the top or bottom line, it definitely doesn't have that much of meaning. And lastly, like everything in life, in order to create something, you need to have that passion or love for it. And a passion is important in all parts of the work. It's definitely important for leadership, because leadership are the ones that inspire us, tell us this is the direction that we want to go ahead and think it, have the freedom to do that. And passion is absolutely key to succeeding. And with that, I'm done. Thank you very much.
Okay, Yuval, thank you very much for that. Apparently, the Wi-Fi is down, so I'm going to have to read the questions to you from the screen here. Can you share learnings on the Google Lens innovation project?
I actually can't. I wasn't involved in that.
Okay, fair enough. What do you think Google does better than any other company in the world?
Again, Google is a huge company right now. As I said, more than 50,000 employees, and there are different parts in Google. I think what Google has been very good at doing is creating that culture, that atmosphere that it's fun to go to work. You have different sort of ways of collaborating with people from diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences. And it's those sort of connections that occur in the workplace that sometimes take a simple conversation over lunch to something more meaningful. And I think Google has a lot of examples of when those 20% projects actually became successful initiatives and products. Gmail is one, and you definitely have others. So I think Google has succeeded in creating that structure on that sort of culture, but it doesn't mean that we don't have more challenges as we go ahead.
Okay, so going back up to the question at the top then, when do you know if you've failed too many times? Do you quantify it? Or like culture, is it something you can only sense?
So it's an excellent question. Is there really a number for the amount of failures? I think there should be a limit. As I said, I mean, you can't just fail and fail and fail. I mean, you really need to examine what didn't work the first time and have you learned the lesson the second time. And if you haven't learned the lesson the second time or the third time and you failed on the same sort of issue, then that's it. It's a failure. So it's highly contextual. It depends on the situation, on the project, on the initiative, on the individuals, in order to really examine where was the failure is, and is it really a failure or is it really experimentation?
Thank you. And how do you accurately predict the adoption gap period for new technology innovations?
So that's an excellent question, because in many cases organizations have metrics such as adoption, which is based on subjective feedback from the different employees. I don't really buy into a lot of that. It needs to be, do the people actually work according to that? And the way you measure that, or your way to check it, is they need to, once you do the change, they need to actually believe in it. They need to understand what the value is it for them. Because if it comes down from the top and you need to work in a certain way, yeah, they may work on it, but that's not real adoption. Real adoption is actually when they see the value, they work through the systems, through the data, and you actually see the differences in the decision making. That's the way adoption works, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. So the final question we have here is Google's acquisition approach for new innovative products and solutions similar to Cisco's to penetrate new markets quickly, and how does Google find such?
I think Google is different to Cisco. I think Google's horizon in terms of when we can have value for that from that company is longer. I think if you just look at the driverless cars or the other initiatives that are going on in Google, I mean, the value that would come from them is more than 3-5 years away. I think Cisco's M&A sort of agenda was we need to reach a certain revenue from that company within 2 or 3 years, which is different. Also, Google looks at different markets. Google is very much, primarily from Larry and Sergey, want to influence the world in a positive way. And I'm not just saying that, they really are like that. That's why they're looking into different industries and trying to take the approach that has worked for Google so well on the web, on other elements, and see if they can succeed as well in other areas. Again, it's like I said before, every situation is different, but if you have the same sort of approach, the agility, the mindset, it may work in other areas as well, and Google is set up to do that.
Yuval, thank you very much.
Thank you.